Hi, what you're about to see is an interview with a vendor in the space in and around data mesh. We'd like to thank Nick Heudecker for graciously doing these interviews with vendors. We'd also like to make it clear that the data mesh community and data mesh learning doesn't necessarily endorse anything that these vendors are talking about, but that we wanted to give them a voice to talk about what they may offer in the space, so people are aware of vendors, because obviously if everybody has to build everything themselves, the data mesh is going to be pretty hard. So with that, we really thank Nick for doing this great work, and we hope that this is good and useful to you.
All right, data mesh learning community. My name's Nick Heudecker. I'm the Senior Director of Market Strategy and Competitive Intelligence at Cribl, the leading observability pipeline company. If you want to know more about Cribl, you can find out more at these links up here. Today, I'm joined by Kent Graziano, the Chief Technical Evangelist at Snowflake. Kent, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Nick. Yeah, so I've been at Snowflake now for 6 years. And prior to that, I was an independent consultant, have a blog, The Data Warrior. I've been in the data space for over 30 years now, though I spent most of my career doing large databases and data warehouses and things like that in the Oracle space until I ran into Snowflake 6 years ago and said, hey, I like the way this thing looks. I'm gonna give it a try, and joined up with them. Co-authored a number of books on data modeling. First one I did years ago was actually with Bill Inman, the father of data warehousing, called the Data Model Resource Book. Done 2 books on the data vault approach to design with the founder of that, Dan Lindstedt. And got a couple of ebooks myself out on Amazon around these topics and on standards and all sorts of fun things. And because one of the advantages of having been in the industry a long time, that there's just a whole long list of things out there that you can find that I've written at some point in the time in the last
there are
30
witnesses.
years.
Yeah, there are witnesses.
Yes,
well, so today we're going to talk about data mesh, and people know Snowflake as a data warehousing company, right? Like that is how it got its start. I know you describe yourselves now as the data cloud. Is that accurate?
that is correct. Yes.
Okay. But there's still a warehouse there at the core. And the data mesh story is much more around decentralization and kind of, let's say, more agility for data. Not a word that typically gets attributed to data warehousing. So what am I missing, right? I know you're a fan, I would say, or a proponent of the data mesh to some degree. How does a warehouse fit into the mesh story today?
Yeah. So, and it's a current misconception about Snowflake that we've been trying to dissuade. And actually just had a conversation, back and forth on LinkedIn yesterday with a couple of data architects in the community that said, well, what you just said, Snowflake, our original marking was we are the data warehouse built for the cloud. And so I say, well, we were a victim of our own marketing success now at this point. So as we've transitioned to data cloud, the thing that people are missing is because they associated us with data warehouse. Data warehousing to us is a workload. It's an approach to how you manage the data. We have folks in our platform today that are doing data lake, they're doing data engineering, they're building data applications, they're doing data science. And so Snowflake really, it's not a data warehouse platform. You can do data warehousing with the platform, but it is an enterprise data platform is the way I try to think of it. And we now call that the data cloud because it's in the cloud, and we have all this great connectivity going on. I grew up in the data warehousing space. I got my cut my teeth with Bill Inman and Claudia Imhoff, and learning Inman's approach to data warehousing, then learning Kimball's approach to data warehousing, and then learning the Data Vault approach to data warehousing, and then getting into agile data warehousing. But then as big data came along and we got talking about all these different things like data lake and things like that, I've learned to look at things a little differently. And when it comes to data mesh, to me, data mesh is, as Zhamak will say, it's an architecture, but it's a socio-technical solution, right? It's not just technical. And it's about how we organize the data.
I want to click on that too, because very frequently when a new concept comes out in data management, people treat it as retail therapy, right? Oh, I'll fix all my problems if I go buy that thing. But they never look at the harder problem, which is the people side of it. So
absolutely,
technology aside, like what do you think are the main inhibitors in an organization's culture that prevent it from kind of going all in on data mesh and being successful with it?
Well, it's exactly that, though. It is the organization's culture. And if the organization is built around a large central IT estate and the management thinking is along those lines, that's a pretty major hurdle to get over. When we went into Agile in the early 2000s, and I was working with people trying to bring the Agile mindset to data, it was the change of mindset that was the challenge, right? The technology wasn't an issue. And that's what you could say about Snowflake is you can organize things in a lot of different ways in Snowflake that I think are amenable to data mesh. I mean, Snowflake's not a data mesh tool and it's not going to solve the data mesh problem, but it gives you a platform that you can potentially do data mesh on. But the bigger challenge is, as you said, it's the people challenge. It's the culture challenge. It's the organizational challenge. And the idea of decentralizing the approach to data so that whether it's the line of business, functional departments, whatever you want to align with your domain data teams, that they are going to take responsibility for the data. We've kind of talked about that in the Agile world when we talked about having product owners and working hand in hand with the business. So people who've been in the Agile world, this is not like a completely alien concept, but getting that domain team to take full responsibility for their data and say, okay, this is not an IT problem. This is your problem. This is your data. You're the experts at the data. You need to form a team that can, do the data pipelines and do the curation, but you also have to change your mindset. It's not just about how are you going to consume and use that data for analysis, is how do others in your organization need to access it? And that's data as a product thinking, right?
Yeah, I want to touch on that for a second. Like I always refer to, all right, the data coming out of the application developers, those types of product teams, they're concerned with first order uses of data, right? What am I doing with it? But getting people to think past to second and third order uses of that data. Maybe second order is analytics that get rolled up into a functional unit. And a third order use might be creating a data product that you then try and sell and market in some other venue. I think it's hard to get there. But you talked about your team needs to build out a data pipeline. That seems like a lot of repetitive, duplicative work for organizations. So how do you advise them to get there, right? Not every team can be masters at Airflow or whatever tools they want to use or build out a Python data pipeline to move data from one point to another. Like that seems difficult. Everybody's fighting for talent. Everybody's fighting for budget. Why should I build the 15th data pipeline in my company? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and my colleague Jennifer Bellasant just did a blog post yesterday, day before yesterday, on our Snowflake site, just about this exact issue, because she and I have had this conversation, and what we've come to the conclusion is, there is a role for what we used to call the center of excellence, right? As the mentors and the coaches for these teams. When I look at what people are writing and discussing around data mesh, the idea that your domain team is going to have a data engineer. Great. If they got one, great. If not, they need to get one. If they don't have one, well, what do we do? Well, we have a center of excellence that can help train them and help bring them up to speed, but more so that I still believe we need to have some centralized standards. And I've seen this at several of our customers where, yeah, we're going to empower the domain data teams to do all the things you just said at all those different levels. And yes, there's a change of mindset that has to happen. But then on the technology side, well, how can we help them there? Well, let's set some standards. Let's not have everybody go buy their own tool. Let's get a couple of tools that we can teach people how to use, and that we know we can find people in the marketplace that know these sorts of tools, and set some standards, create some templates, some jumpstart templates to help them, and say, if you're going to onboard data from SAP, here's a good way to do it. And here's the tool we recommend you use. If you're going to bring data in from Excel, same thing. Here's how we do it. If you need streaming data off of an edge device, here's the way we're going to do it. And give people that guidance. And it's really about empowering the teams now. It's not just, at the top level, the CDO says, okay, we're going data mesh. Everybody, every department, you're now a domain data team. Go hire yourself a data engineer, go hire yourself a data scientist, go hire yourself a data architect, have at it. Just remember, you got to produce stuff that everybody else can use. It has to be interoperable, and gives them all these, I'll say the data mesh pillars and say, this is what you got to go do. But then, we're going to have, what are our current IT team, we're going to repurpose some of them into a center of excellence. And maybe it becomes a matrix organization initially. Okay, we've got 20 data engineers, whatever we've got, and we'll farm them out to you to get you started, right? You're going to loan you these data engineers. But before we do any of that, and just like Sprint Zero and Agile, we got to set up the standards. We got to set up some governance at that level, right? Is what's the high level guidance, governance, and standards that we can give to a domain data team to get them started. And
it's interesting as we sorry to cut you off there, but we're recording this in early December of 2021, and just a week ago there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about it. Basically, it's time to abolish IT, and that's a hot button issue, right? Like several years ago, the Harvard Business Review published, IT doesn't matter. My former employer, Gartner, they took that personally. But the Wall Street Journal article was very much, there's IT and there's the business, and they're at loggerheads a lot of times. I think this idea of having a center of excellence, right, that does provide templates and best practices, and when necessary, some talent, makes a lot of sense. And it starts to push things together more than apart. And I think we've always had that challenge. Now, look, not everybody in the company is going to be able to feed a data warehouse or something like that, but they can get farther than they were. And so as part of I think the data mesh story that not a lot of folks talk about, it's this idea of data literacy, right? Like, I want to produce products that everybody can use. Yes. But they have to be able to interpret them. They have to understand them. And I think that it hasn't been talked about much, but do you see a role for data literacy as part of this as well?
I was going to bring that up because the conference I was at here on Tuesday, there was a panel discussion about data management. And the final question is well, what do you see as the biggest challenge for the future of data management? And one of my buddies, George Trujillo, who was on that panel, said data literacy and data culture, is because we're seeing the value of becoming data driven more so than before. And there is so much data, and we are having these conversations about data as a product and data products. You have to empower the business people to understand it. And that is data literacy and data fluency. And that's key to it. So this is all part of what you originally asked me about on the socio side of the socio-technical, right, is the culture change. And that means that the executive management of the company that says, this sounds good, this sounds like it solves a lot of problems for us, which I believe it does, but it's not about getting rid of IT. It's about empowering IT to help the business, but it's also empowering the business to be good consumers and good data stewards, which means they have to understand it. So you have to have that that background in data literacy, and data literacy is going to mean different things for, a financial analyst versus a data scientist. And same likewise, the data products that we produce. The data product that you produce for a data scientist may look very different than the data product you produce for a financial analyst. One might need a canned dashboard, and that is your data product. The other wants a 2,000 attribute feature set, which, well, that might be a view in a database that pulls all that data together to them uses terminology they understand and puts it in a sandbox, makes it accessible to them in a sandbox where they can then point their machine learning tool at and do what they need to do. And that all goes into the self-serve infrastructure as a platform idea, right? Is how are you going to serve all this stuff up? If you get this all organized, how do we make it easy for people who are new to this space in particular and now have these new responsibilities? Well, this is, again, I think where IT still comes in, is setting those standards and providing that self-serve infrastructure so that they don't have to have database administrators and infrastructure engineers and people like that to do this. And that's where I see Snowflake fitting into it as a platform that can be deployed within an organization and across the globe in this global network that we call the data cloud. But within Snowflake, and this is what I'm seeing that aligns quite well with data mesh, and we have customers that are talking about it and doing presentations now about doing data mesh on Snowflake, is we can have not only separate Snowflake accounts, but you can have separate databases within an account. So you can very easily go into your Snowflake account and create a database for each data domain. And with the role-based access control and the security protocols, keep them completely separate, right? So they never even know the other ones exist. But because it's on the same platform, that means the sharing of the data is very easy. Within an account, it's just a grant select, and you have a read-only access, and maybe your data product is a view, and you have a data product schema that you grant select privileges to the other domains based on their needs and their requirements. And then all they got to do is they can write a query, pull that data, join it to their data to do whatever analytics they need. On the outbound side, we have the Snowflake Marketplace, where people can publish what I consider a curated data set, which I could easily say data product now, right there. And it's got a catalog, it's searchable. If you have a Snowflake account, you can go in and you click a couple of buttons and you get access to the data. It shows up as a database in your Snowflake account. And now you can then downstream do what you need to do with that data. And so you have that discoverability aspect, which is part of data mesh. It's got to be discoverable. It has to be in a format that people can understand. And so we can do that. And so I see people doing that. And then within an ecosystem, people can build data exchanges that are private. So it doesn't have to be public. And this is all part of Snowflake's secure data sharing feature. And that's something that we didn't have in a traditional data warehouse platform, something that's built in that makes it that easy, that it is self-serve. It's a couple of clicks. There's a nice UI. You don't have to know any SQL code to do it. And
the
self-service that's the kind of thing that empowers teams, right?
Yeah, the self-service aspect is definitely new. I mean, views and things like that and roles.
You could always build views, yes.
Yeah, you could always do that. But it's interesting that just a few years ago, people were saying, you know what, man, it's just going to be all NoSQL. We don't need any of the old trappings from before. It's going to be amazing. Spoiler, it wasn't amazing. And now people are saying, there's real value in some of these, let's say, more legacy or more traditional features in data warehousing in general, right? Not just calling out Snowflake, but that's a fairly comman feature.
Well, let's even say let's not even call it a data warehouse. Let's say it's a database, right?
Right.
It's a database. And it's more of a traditional. It's ANSI SQL compliant at some level, because turned out there was a whole bunch of people that knew SQL that if you gave them a good platform and they didn't have to worry about tuning and didn't have to worry about the scaling, or it was a simple command to scale, they could do a heck of a lot more work. And then, on the data science side, you've got Python and Java and Scala and things like that. And so that made it a lot easier when we kind of, again, as you said, backed away a little bit from the whole NoSQL thing, where you had to learn all these kind of new skills and not a lot of people really understood it. But once you got that concept out there of, to me, it was schema on read. And that's something that the Snowflake founders included in Snowflake, that, ingest JSON data and write basically modified SQL to access it without having to do all the ETL and getting schema on read. That makes all of it that much more accessible and easier to do these things and to change the way you're thinking, so that you can focus on producing the right data products instead of all the bells and whistles of, well, how are we going to make a query go fast? Okay, that's table stakes, right? We have to not even be talking about how fast is the query. If you're having to say that the data is coming back too slow, you've kind of already lost the battle on the data product, right?
Agreed. So I want to wrap it up here, start to wrap it up. So what are your recommendations? You had to give top 3 recommendations to a company that was looking at moving in the direction of a data mesh, right? This is not intended to be a product endorsement. But what do you think the top 3 recommendations you would give to a company would be?
You can't buy the solution.
Okay, there you go. That's
right?
A good one.
Right. Yeah. So, I'll be the first one to say is buying Snowflake does not get you a data mesh, right? Give you a platform to build it on. But yeah, see, you can't buy the solution. It has to be a culture change that the organization is ready to adopt and really adhere to. And part of that is, as we said, you have to invest in data literacy. You have to allow for the time for the culture change to occur. I ran into this with Agile. People said, okay, we're doing 2-week sprints and like magically we're Agile. Well, no, this is going to be the same thing with data mesh. Just because you designated domain data teams doesn't mean that you're now a data mesh organization.
So it's like if I say I'm cloud native.
So you have to allow for the time for the culture change.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like if I say I'm cloud native, doesn't that just
that
magically move all my apps to the cloud? That's what it says on the tin.
Right.
No. But no, you're right.
Yeah.
Like it takes time for these things to happen.
And then you do have to do your due diligence and investigation and find that self-serve infrastructure. How are we going to do that? What product or products are we going to need? We need data catalogs. You still got to do data movement. You've got to do data engineering. And so again, as an organization, that center of excellence that we talked about is maybe that's the thing, is you need to put that center of excellence together that does that pilots some of these tools with the data mesh mindset, right? And it's like, how can we do this knowing who we have to empower and what our end goal is to provide value to the organization, to our customers, to our supply chain, whatever it is, with data products. We approach the tools from that perspective, not just, hey, we just want the fastest database in the world, that solves the problem, because it doesn't, right? So it's, invest in the culture, changing the culture, allow time for the change, and then take a look at the tools and technology that are going to empower you to apply this approach in a reasonable fashion, and expect failure. I think that's one of the things you should always allow for failure, iterate often, and learn from your mistakes.
I think it's
kind
fantastic.
Of the traditional things.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic advice. Kent, this has been great. Is there anything else you want to add, or where can people find you online if they want to tell you how much they agree or disagree with you?
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me on Twitter. It's just Kent Graziano on Twitter, and as I think I'm pretty much the only Kent Graziano on LinkedIn as well. You can Google the Data Warrior. I have a website, kentgraziano.com. And of course, on the Snowflake front, it's snowflake.com. And we've got all kinds of stuff out there for people want to take a look at that and see what we might have to offer to help with your data mesh journey.
Perfect. Kent, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Thanks.